like to say my name is Ann Roosevelt, and I'm the president of the Cambridge Water Board. We have the other members of the Cambridge Water Board here, and I would like to ask them to just say their name and say where they're from. Kathleen from Buffalo, but I live on Lodge Street now.
Richard Johnson, Harvard Square area.
Okay, thank you. And I noticed we have a city councilor with us, Craig Kelly, known as Mr. Environment. Would you like to stand up? So thank you all for coming. As you know, this is an actual water board meeting, but we aren't going to take anything up except the discussion of plastic-lined pipes. Cambridge really has not embarked on this technology, and so this would be a new thing for Cambridge. And as citizens who are given oversight of the water system, we want to make sure that we know everything about it and that the technology is safe. And so we have invited two people who are quite well versed in this technology. The first one is Andy Welton, and I'm just going to read from his bio so that you all kind of know where he comes from. Andrew Welton, PhD, is an environmental engineer and Purdue University faculty member. Dr. Welton's expertise focuses on infrastructure, the environment, and public health, with specific emphasis on emerging health and environmental risks associated with technology and disasters. Presently, he is leading a major rapid response project to elucidate the environmental and occupational exposure risks of cured-in-place pipe, CIPP, which happens to be the kind of pipe that we are looking at as an option for Cambridge. In 2014, Welton's university research team responded to the Freedom Industries chemical spill in West Virginia, where 15% of the state was distributing drinking water of unknown toxicity and was under a water ban for more than a week. West Virginia Governor Earl Ray Thompson also specifically requested his assistance in response to this large-scale disaster. Today, Dr. Welton's team is also examining the role of plumbing technology and design on drinking water safety. Welton has testified at the Indiana Senate and briefed the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board. Prior to joining Purdue University, he served on the University of South Alabama faculty. Welton also previously worked for the U.S. Army, NIST, Virginia Tech, and several engineering consulting firms, and served as an expert witness. Andrew earned a BS in civil engineering, an MS in environmental engineering, and a PhD in civil engineering from Virginia Tech. So we are very happy to welcome Andy here, and he's going to go first. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here, Ann, and the Water Board for letting me speak, as well as thank you for the audience for being here as well. Some of you have come from pretty far away, I know, to be here. What I'm going to tell you about in this next 20 minutes or so. Oh, can you hear me now? Oh, that's that telephone. Can you hear me now? Anyways. What I'm going to tell you about in the next 20 minutes or so is some of the research that we have conducted at Purdue and in Alabama about certain plastics technologies, and bring you up to speed on really where engineering, civil engineering and environmental engineers are in understanding the technologies that are being used today. So across the country, Cambridge is not alone. You have iron pipes in your water system. They are badly corroded, and they need to be either repaired or replaced. And you're not alone in this issue. Many of you may live in the city of Cambridge and have homes that also have iron pipes that may need to be repaired and replaced. And so in all facets of infrastructure, specifically water, you're facing this issue. You know, replacing pipes is extremely expensive, especially when you have to go through neighborhoods, roads, around bridges or over bridges. And so what we really need to do is think outside the box and find ways to repair pipes in situ so that we don't have to dig up, if we can afford to, these roads, bridges, and other locations. When we repair or replace our existing pipes, we improve water pressure. We can decrease the age or how long that water hangs out in that pipe before it gets to your house. We can increase the color and the clarity of water. We can have less red water incidents, less yellow water incidents, brown water. You sometimes can improve the taste and odor of the water. And you can decrease real estate for where organisms can grow. And so if you look at the picture on that slide there, that is an iron pipe, and it's called tuberculation. So that is corrosion deposits have come out of the iron and basically formed habitat for organisms, okay? So the more surface area and habitat you have in pipes, the more stuff can grow, okay? And generally, we don't want stuff growing in our pipes because they can harbor other issues that we have to worry about. So plastics are being used across the country for a number of different technologies. And they're being used to repair drinking water pipes in place because you don't have to dig up or remove that pipe. You can actually chemically manufacture a pipe in a pipe, or you can chemically manufacture a coating in a pipe. And the American Water Works Association has a manual that lists a bunch of different technologies. So you really have a couple options, but it all depends upon the condition of the pipe that's installed. So if you have a very badly corroded pipe that may mechanically fail, it wouldn't be a good idea to spray a coating on the inside. A coating that's what's called non-structural. That means that it has no structural support, and the pipe will ultimately collapse at some point. So what you have to think about if you're going to try to repair these pipes is a structural repair job. And that's where we are today many times with creating new pipes in existing pipes. And I'll show you some pictures of what that is. So what I want to do, however, is tell you, if you're in the audience and you haven't heard about these technologies or know much about them, there are civil and environmental engineers and construction engineers that are across the country, and me included, were never trained on these technologies in school. Okay, so all these technologies have really come onto the marketplace in the last 20 years. And so historically, these are the courses here. If you look up there, the types of courses that civil, environmental, and construction engineers take in school, and none of them really have to do with plastics. So what we do is we got trained in plastics, and some of the past experiences that I've had, I was at organizations that specialized in plastics, creating them, testing them, characterizing them, making better products. And so what we do now at the university is we team up with industry, and we go around to different cities, different ultimately countries, to put on workshops. So in the morning we teach people about plastics and kind of the university education, get them up to speed. And then in the afternoon we have the vendors come in who want to sell products to those utilities and cities, and then they can ask really informed, targeted questions about their products to make sure that it's right for their application. Okay. But I can tell you from firsthand experience, I've had an experience where that gray pipe there was pulled from my house and down in Alabama, and that is what's called polybutylene pipe. That is the gray pipe that there was a class action lawsuit for, $300 million. It was sold to utilities and homeowners and contractors across the country. The issue is that that pipe was never tested appropriately, and so it was installed without understanding that chlorine aggressively attacks it and causes it to disintegrate, basically. okay? So that's an issue. And there have been thousands of high-density polyethylene pipe failures that have been documented out west associated with attack of that plastic pipe by disinfectants. And there has not been a class action lawsuit for that, but anyways, there are applications where you wouldn't install that plastic over other plastics. And then right now in Southern California, about 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by a group asking for help. That is a piece of copper pipe you see up there. You see the circle, which is a copper pipe. Inside the copper pipe is a red coating, but at the very bottom of that pipe is a very hard substance. And what happened was when they went in and sprayed a plastic coating on it, the plastic coating basically didn't have enough strength and slumped down to the bottom, okay? So you're supposed to see an equal thickness of coating around that whole pipe, and in that picture you don't. And that coating failed after 9 years. So it was reported to be a 20 to 50 year lifetime to the homeowner, and it failed after 9 years, okay? So there are situations where there are products that have been used inappropriately, put in incorrectly, or just never tested the right way before they were used. So cured-in-place pipe technology is something that was developed, patented in the 1970s. It's been used in the US, UK, Canada, a number of other countries for many years. And what it is basically you have a truck that shows up with this, think of a sock, chemically saturated sock. So instead of taking a sock and put it in a bowl of water, think of a sock, put it in a bowl of liquid chemicals. And those chemicals are then held within that sock, and then they basically funnel that sock into a pipe underneath the ground. Okay, so while cars are driving over it, they're repairing the pipe in the ground. And you can either harden that sock inside the pipe with steam, UV light, or hot water. And you can harden it for, it might take hours, it might take days, depends on how thick that sock wall is and how much chemical you have there. It depends on the temperature that you're running at and a number of other issues. And when you look down that pipe after, you can see the picture there. That blue material is the liner. That's called the CIPP, a cured-in-place pipe. And so for there, we see a concrete pipe with a CIPP inside it. And so you cut both ends off real quick, and that brings you to having a finished job. This is just an example of a sewer pipe CIPP repair. The same concept is applied for drinking water pipes. You take your blue liner, you put it inside the pipe, you pump in water or steam on the left-hand side there. It cures the pipe liner. Sometimes you see this white stuff coming out of manholes or nearby areas, and then at the end you basically cut that pipe and it's hardened against the wall. So you have a plastic pipe that you chemically manufactured inside an existing pipe. Okay, this is what happens when the white stuff comes out of the hole, and sometimes in the sewer applications they've had incidents where the chemicals have backed up into people's sewer systems and then got into the buildings and caused building evacuations and such. So here's an example of a drinking water pipe CIPP job. Historically, epoxy resin is used for CIPP installations. Okay, so there's multiple different types of resins out there. Epoxy is used for drinking water applications, primarily because it's after cured, it's pretty strong. It can hold pressure. Okay. So we have a project ongoing right now, and I'll just tell you about two of them real quickly, to determine what materials are emitted into the air. What is that white stuff that's coming out of the ground, and what does it consist of? And so we've conducted some work in Indiana and California. We have been examining the raw chemicals before we cure them, and then we're identifying worksite safety issues. Another project we have ongoing is with these 6 states at the bottom here. These 6 states were concerned about, they wanted to use CIPP technology, but they didn't want to have any associated environmental consequences. There were fish kills in certain states. State of Washington was one of them, where fish kills would happen after a CIPP job. A number of other issues would happen after CIPP jobs. And so these states are working with us to try to figure out more environmentally friendly ways to use this technology and not cause harm. So because I'm in the university, I have to show you some type of chemical equation. I was an engineer, I showed you some pipes, now I'll show you some chemical equations. Today, plastics, as I mentioned, can be chemically manufactured inside drinking water pipes. Epoxy is used for our cured-in-place pipe technology, but actually epoxy is also sprayed on the inside of drinking water pipes too for non-structural applications. Okay. There are other coatings out there. Polyurethane is another coating material that's used. It's not the same polyurethane that you put on your floors. It's a different chemistry. But the same concept, you put them on there. And then there's another material called polyurea, which you may hear a lot more about, and that is because it doesn't require 24 hours of drying. You can actually put the material back into service within hours after using it. Okay. So to have an understanding about leaching and drinking water safety, you want to understand typically what's in drinking water. And so what we typically do is we want to understand what is in a typical safe drinking water, and this has generally been understood to contain about 1 to 6 milligrams or mass, some weight of some carbon compounds in there. So the carbon compounds could be coming from fresh pond that are benign, that have no health impacts to you. They're just there. They could be coming from another source that have no impacts. And so we typically have 1 to 6 milligram per liter of that. pH 6.5 to 8.5. Here you use chloramines to disinfect your water, and you pump it out into the distribution system. And so that's basically to prevent things from growing in your pipes and hopefully in your homes. So you want to have some type of residual. You also have individual contaminants, as I mentioned, and you never want those to exceed safe exposure limits for that, limits that would cause adverse health effects. Disinfectant byproducts are produced by mistake. They were never intended to be produced in drinking water treatment. These disinfectants are out there, they react with chemicals in the distribution system, and they are formed. So your utility tries to make sure that they stay below the allowable levels in drinking water there. And of course, everybody wants safe, clear, nice smelling water, right? Or no smelling water. And so that's an important issue. So what I can tell you from our studies at Purdue University and other places is we've been testing plastics for about 15 years now, and we know that new plastics, for example, leach chemicals into the water. We haven't found a plastic that doesn't leach anything yet. And those organic chemicals actually can be used by organisms to grow. So they can actually grow on the walls of the pipes. And these are like bacteria or other low-order organisms to form a biofilm. These chemicals that leach out of these plastics can react with monochloramine, can react with free chlorine in other cities, and transform themselves into disinfectant byproducts. So you can have unintentional formation of disinfectant byproducts because, not just because of the fresh pond water, but because of the materials that you put in contact with that pipe. Okay? Organic chemicals degrade and can react with water, and polyurea and polyurethane coatings actually change the pH of the water, or they can change the pH of the water. We've seen that in the laboratory. And organic chemicals, of course, can be present by themselves. So a couple big misconceptions I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page with here. There's an organization called the National Sanitation Foundation International. It is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. It is not the NSF government agency. It is not a government agency. And there's a couple questions that I get all the time. So the National Sanitation Foundation International did not receive product testing authority from the EPA. So EPA has no product testing authority. They only care about the chemicals in the water. They don't actually approve products. There's no Consumer Product Safety Commission for the U.S. They're drinking water. Also, there's another myth out there that EPA tests plumbing products to determine if they're safe, and that's not true either. They don't test products to determine that they're safe, okay? So for plastic coatings and liners, there are tests that these materials undergo. There are tests.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Can you pull that up a little bit?
Sure. For plastic coatings and liners, there are tests that products undergo in the U.S. And these include, you could say, leaching tests. So they take a product from the manufacturer and they test it in the lab to see what chemicals leached out, if it leached out above certain standards. And the existing test, first of all, throws away the first 4 days of water. So they install the pipe, or they install the material, and then they leach it for 4 days and then discard that water. And then take a sample to test that water. Okay, so for the first 4 days, there's really no data about what leaches out. For water testing, there's no organic carbon, so there's no way to figure out like what the total amount of stuff coming out of these plastics are. There's no disinfectant byproduct production analysis, so that the test doesn't tell you if there's more disinfectant byproducts produced from one product than another. The water pH, we found that higher water pH causes some plastics to leach more, which was really amazing to us, because, but in hindsight, I guess not. So water pH here is not considered in that fashion in terms of leaching. So what we want to know is, what's the worst case scenario that could happen, and then does our water quality fall into that worst case, or are we okay? And there's no way really for you to know that right now. All drinking water disinfections are not considered, so you all use monochloramine. There are some cities that use chlorine dioxide. There are some cities that use potassium permanganate. The materials that are tested by NSF 61 do not get tested for chlorine dioxide and permanganate. Okay, so you may not actually have directly corroborating evidence for your product and your application based on the water quality. There's no organism growth impacts considered. There's no taste and odor impacts considered. And we've had some issues where people have called us up. There was a homeowner or a contractor in Oklahoma, and he couldn't get final payment from the people that he had built a $1 million house for. And the reason was, reportedly, was that their water smelled like gasoline. And it was the plastic pipe that they put in caused the water to smell like gasoline, but if you ran a drinking water test, it complied with all EPA standards and it was NSF 61 certified. So, there are reasons why problems can develop after you install products that are not necessarily tested for. And I do need to mention the NSF 61 standard. The reason why none of these issues are considered is not because they weren't ever considered. It's because the testing standard is not designed to answer these questions. Okay, so these are the questions that people ask about, and that testing standard is not designed to give you all the answers. Okay. So for U.S. and Canada, so looking at that, actually I need to say one more thing. So all the data that is collected for the products that are approved is not publicly shared. You can't go find it. Even certified products you can't go find. And so a lot of our questions could be probably resolved if we had access to that information, because then we could do our own research to see what levels of chemicals are present and if it's consistent across brands, or is one brand better than the other. So in absence of that data, I've focused here on just epoxy, reviewed a few studies for you. There was one study that just got completed by the American Water Works Associations and Kansas University. This study looked at one NSF international approved formulation at 2 pHs using monochloramine and free chlorine. They did like a laboratory leaching test, and what they found was bisphenol A and bisphenol F leached out, and there are other chemicals that did leach out. Some of these chemicals degraded on their own and just in water, and bisphenol A, bisphenol F actually reacted with monochloramine and disappeared. Okay, so if you have monochlorine present, you have bisphenol A leaching out, you can have a problem trying to find bisphenol A because it may actually be reacting with your disinfectant. Okay. There's another study in 2007 that was conducted on one formulation, and there was a total organic carbon that leached out from this plate of epoxy, and it was 6.3 milligram per liter. So I told you about 1 to 6 milligram per liter is typical in drinking water. 6 was added just by that epoxy. Okay, so I can speak louder. Is this okay?
Is that the mic?
Okay, is that okay? Yes. Okay. So, 2007, there was a study that was conducted, as I mentioned, total organic carbon leached out, and total organic carbon is just a total summation of the total mass of chemicals that leaches out, so it doesn't tell you what it is. It may not be of an issue. Except, one of the issues that you always want to worry about is, can we limit the amount of stuff leaching out into our water? Because just because we don't know what it is doesn't mean bad things can't happen. So let's prevent that from leaching out. Bisphenol A was detected in 2007, and a number of other compounds were detected as well. Disinfectants reacted with the stuff that leached out of the epoxy, and so disinfectant byproducts were produced as well. These are chemicals that are regulated, that have limits, that your utility already works to keep their water under those limits to make sure that you get safe and healthy water.
The product ones that are carcinogenic, I see polyamine there and the styrene.
Right. So I listed styrene and toluene were chemicals that seem to have leached out from the study. What I will tell you is that the data shown here is from different studies, and I would say it's not representative of all the epoxy formulations and products out there that are on the market. And I say that because somebody else said it too, who's done testing. And this is it, right? So since 1989, we have 8 epoxies that have been tested in the U.S. where data is publicly available, that we can go in and determine the validity of that work and study. In 2002, there was a study done on 5 formulations, and they got benzene, toluene, and xylene. They combined all those concentrations together, and they got a substantial amount that were present. Now, you asked me what level of benzene was detected. I don't know. The data, unfortunately, the studies that are out there, people are not fully describing what they did or fully describing how they calculated this information, okay? Which is one of the issues we have when we evaluate the credibility of studies or not. Total organic carbon leached out 345 milligram per liter, okay? This was in 2002. And then in 1989, there was another study done on U.S. products where more chemicals were found. Water soaking caused more rapid bleaching than air drying. So if you install these products and you fill them with water after it's installed, that allows stuff to leach out faster instead of just leaving the pipe open and hoping that it off-gases into the air. Okay? So that's it for U.S. and Canada studies. Right, so there's been, in the U.S., there have been no longitudinal studies, there have been no long-term studies. These studies primarily have been a couple days, a couple weeks, or a month in length in terms of bleaching, not 20, 30, 40 years of bleaching. Yes. No, all of these, actually, the first 3 studies are all glue applied epoxy. The last one actually is 3 field storage tanks. So they went in and they actually like looked at storage tanks that had epoxy in them, took water from it, and looked back. So that was 1989. My clicker's not working. So in Europe, they've done a lot more testing. They've done a lot more testing in Finland and France, in Spain and Korea and the UK. They've used epoxy for a long time in the UK. It came over from the UK to the US. And what they've found out primarily is that older epoxy leached more chemicals than newer epoxy. In some places, 20 times more. In Europe, they've tested new epoxy and they've tested old epoxy that's already installed. And so they've done a lot more homework and publicly available information there. In France, they looked at 3 new coatings, and what they found is they found increased leaching for the 3rd coating for 5 months. So it kept increasing and leaching over a 5-month period, whereas you would expect it to get lower with time.
Do they all fluorinate their water?
In Europe, no, generally not. Generally not. There are some of these studies that did have chlorinated water, at very low levels of chlorinated water. I think it was free chlorine, not monochlorine. So they've also found, like in the US studies, odor can be caused by plastics, and that microbial growth was higher in an epoxy-coated storage tank than a stainless steel storage tank, where you didn't have epoxy. So what we found here is, in summary, epoxy, which is used for drinking water contact applications in the US, it's created, you create it inside a pipe or inside a tank. There's been wide variability in leaching. There are many chemicals are released and have no drinking water standard, right? There is no standard for bisphenol A in the US. There is no standard for BPA. There is no standard for these other chemicals that are leaching out. TOC level has been reported as high as 345 milligram per liter, when about 6 is typical in drinking water. And free chlorine and monochlorine react with some of these chemicals that are leached out. And so if you go looking for them, you might not actually find them, okay? Depending on the disinfectant you use. And odors can be caused. So as I mentioned, there are differences between what the US and outside the US have found. But in the US, there really isn't much data. So my perspective here, just looking through all the data, is that there's just little information available about chemical leaching from epoxy materials. And actually, there's even less for polyurethane and polyurea coatings. Okay? So there was a new study that I just told you about that was completed in 2017, and Dr. Stephen Radke from Kansas University had this statement in the final report. And I'll just read it. It says, since epoxy formulations, application methods, curing times, and other factors vary among manufacturers, the results are not necessarily representative of those that would be obtained using other applications or epoxy formulations. And I think that sums up really where we are today in terms of understanding the water quality impacts of, in this situation, epoxy formulations, because there just hasn't been enough data available for people to look at it. So looking ahead, if Cambridge and other cities and municipalities want to make and take the jump into using these advanced materials, they can require products to pass more stringent tests. You can write your bid documents more stringently. Instead of saying you can just pass NSF 61 testing, you can say, pass NSF 61 testing, and you shall not cause odor in the water under these conditions. You shall not leach this amount of carbon into the water. You shall not cause disinfectant byproducts under certain conditions. But the city has to come up with those pass-fail thresholds. The city has to come up with those. And then you could have contractors, whether it be just for epoxy or polyurea, polyurethane, or other materials, pre-compete. They have to pass a test to get on the list of qualified bidders. And then what you could do is you could have the people, the contractors, be required to do water testing under certain conditions after they've installed it. We already do this with putting pipes in the ground, plastic pipes, and then cutting out sections and sending it to a laboratory to do brake testing. Why are we doing this for water testing? It would make sense. So I think there's ways that you can do it if you choose to go down this road. You require all these extra steps, and you don't just necessarily target one organization or one industry. You apply it across products and across technologies. So with that, I want to thank you. I apologize for the microphone copy of this. I can provide that to Ann, and Ann can provide that to me.
Thank you. I don't know if we're going to... Should we hold questions for Andrew, or do you feel, and go to Joan next? Or, pardon me? Oh. So we will take questions. The only question we have is, should we take questions now for Andrew, or do you want to wait and hear Joan's presentation first? Shall we just... Okay, good. Let's take a couple of questions.
Yes?
I'm sorry I'm using late, so we may have covered this already, but I'm just wondering, in your opinion, what is the best...
I'll repeat the question.
What would be the ideal product? I mean, if money were go on...
Okay, so the question was, in my opinion, what would be the ideal product? Glass. I tell people glass. And it's primarily because in the laboratories, we always use glass as controls. And so it dawned on me one day, what would be the ideal? I think what you have to do as a community is figure out what your comfort level is with technologies. And there are, and I can tell you, I showed you some examples of technologies that have catastrophically failed. But there are technologies out there, in the same ones out there, that didn't fail. Okay, so there are very positives associated with plastics in that they provide strength, they don't leach that much, but there are others that you can get and install in your system and then find out after the fact that they do leach a lot.
Sure,
Yeah.
people laugh when you said glass. So I'm assuming that that's not practical for city streets, but after glass, what would you say is the best product?
Right, so after glass, what would be the best product? It depends on your location. For example, if you have corrosive soils, putting in metal pipes may not be a smart idea. If you have a low water table, if you have a gas station that has a contaminated site right near it, maybe you don't use a plastic pipe as it runs along that gas station. So it really depends on the site conditions, but also comfort level of the engineers and the community. Sorry. Yes?
To me, it's what is your acceptable level of impact on human health. Because all of these studies are not enough to be able to answer the questions about cancer and a whole lot of other things. So I think we should talk about that and what's acceptable. So it's amazing, but not surprising to me from the public health perspective, that people are not, you dodge that whole point about we don't have the studies, why not? There may be the studies. So say a little bit more about that, because that's, I think, the real issue for Cambridge and all of us.
Okay. So the question was about health and what the issue is
with human health.
With human health, and I am going to actually kick that over to Joan to some of the issues, because she's more qualified to talk about that. There are some of these products that leach chemicals that don't have standards. Okay, so today the issue is if there's no standard for it, it doesn't harm you. And that's the perspective many times in industry.
Right,
I think,
but that's not a good public health standard.
And I think I know where Dave might be going, but there are, like NSF 61, they have standards, and they test for BPA, and they test for bisphenol, but they've come up with their own standards for what's acceptable exposure using their own toxicologists. So I would say I'm going to kick it over to...
Do they tell us what those are?
Yeah, they're probably available. So for bisphenol A, it's like 0.2 microgram per liter for an exposure limit in others. But there's a lot of debate about them. Okay. So.
Okay, would you ask your question? And identify yourself.
Yeah, I'm Dave Perkins. I work for NSF, and most of the last 30 years I've been associated with.
You can't.
Yeah, I'm Dave. I'm with NSF, and for the past 30 years I've worked with NSF 61. And one thing I do want to point out about Standard 61 is it does have health effect thresholds for about 1,600 chemicals, but might be about 2,000 now. There are hundreds of thousands of organic chemicals out there, though, so certainly there's still a lot of work to be done. But the way it establishes the safe thresholds is there's a risk assessment methodology in it that relies on the toxicology literature to derive those values. And, you know, I'm not here to say NSF 61 is perfect. You're right, most products are tested with one exposure water, and or maybe sometimes 3, and maybe there's other options for exposure to water, but the big benefit NSF 61 has provided is it's a public standard, it's reviewed annually, any member of the public can attend the standards meetings and can make suggestions to change the standard. And we have, over the last 30 years, changed the test methodology for several product types. Quite often. So it is a dynamic standard that can be changed with further input. And finally, I mean, at least it is something in place that can differentiate good products from bad products, because what we find, you know, especially with a product like the CIPP or the epoxy coating, is there's some manufacturers that can make these things really well, that pass the test every time you test it. And there's other manufacturers that can never get their product to pass the test because it's leaching contaminants above those safe thresholds. So, you know, there's good products and bad products, and it's not always the product type. A lot of times it's the product manufacturer and their quality control system.
Henry, I saw your hand first.
Quick question. You mentioned how you put it in and save money. Suppose you have to take it out. So expensive, actually.
So the question was, you talk about putting it in, saves money, but what if you take it out? So in whenever the vinyl chloride monomer regulations passed, it caused a lot of problems for water companies. Because what happened was they installed PVC pipe in Kansas, miles of it, and after the vinyl chloride monomer regulation passed, they had to go in and rip up all the new pipe because it wouldn't pass the regulation. So there are consequences associated with putting in a product that either is installed incorrectly or just wasn't the right application. My recommendation to utilities and cities is make that part of the contract, so that you don't release the contractor once they walk away from the job site to have to pass other tests like they do with the structural integrity of the test. Because that's just my advice, because otherwise, the city's on the hook for ripping it all out and replacing it.
That's part of it, putting it in.
Yeah, and a lot of people are uncomfortable with that because the mistake would be pretty significant.
So let me just say that obviously, we didn't talk about this before, but we wouldn't really be considering this new technology if it weren't a lot cheaper. We've used ductile iron before for our pipes, and it's lasted for 100 years. So the question also is, how long is CIPP pipe going to last for? And I have looked at some studies that show that it could last for 50 years, and yet there was another, I believe there was another study, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that said that it's only insured or for 7 years or in place. I don't know. We'll look into that fact. But, yes, Polly.
I'm Polly Cobb, and I'm an electrical manager. My concern is when chemicals leach into the water, they're going to combine with other chemicals that might be there. And I don't know the extent to which these chemicals are reactive, and reactive with what. And so beside the quantity of leached resins that might be in the water, it is what the effect is going to be over the long term with human beings who are drinking water department that is treating the water prior to going into the pipes. I mean, there are all those questions that I think need to be answered, and most of these tests seem to have been done for a fairly short period of time, and didn't cover those kinds of questions. And so that would be my concern.
And your concern's valid. I will tell you that the plastics industry has done a terrible job of identifying the chemicals that leach out into the water and understanding what happens to them. At least publicly, they haven't put that out there. And so that's left utilities and cities and homeowners in the community struggling with using the technology or not using the technology and wanting to make better informed decisions. I think some of the work that was done in Europe would be fantastic if you could sample 200 storage tanks in the US and 200 pipe sections that have already been lined. That'd be tremendous. We're not going to know, however, if we install stuff today, what that stuff will do in 20 or 30 or 40 years, because we don't even know what the stuff that's already installed is doing. And you have people trying to play catch up. So I think you're right on in that it's frustrating.
So can I take a couple of more questions, and then I'd like to have the next presentation. Yes.
You had some personal failures with pipes. For your family, do you buy water and
Oh, I'm happy to tell you. So in Alabama, we actually were buying a house. We were buying a house, get a home inspector, and then make sure he or she is competent, because ours was not. They told us it was PVC pipe, we had nothing to worry about. So make sure they're competent, make sure they do the home inspection, and if you have that polybutylene pipe, the class action lawsuit's over. So what you want to do is ask the person who's trying to sell you the home to pay for it, the repo, okay? My approach is I drink tap water in where I was in Alabama, in Cambridge, and everywhere else. I didn't drink it in Flint when I was there a couple months ago. But the hotel front desk told me I should, but I called up a friend of mine and he said, no, we're still doing research here, don't touch it. So I don't really use a water filter unless I know that there is a lead pipe somewhere. If there's a lead pipe in the home or in the service line, then you should be using a water filter, period. Just because it's better to be safe than not. So that's pretty much what we do.
Can I get one more question? You were in international life.
I was just wondering, hearing Mr. Ginsburg from NSF speak, that they knew which manufacturers were incompetent and which were not. And the fact comes up, as it did with the automobile at unsafe and in speed years ago, that the job is specifically to tell which, if you know particularly, it seems egregious to allow the incompetence to continue in without fines, without oversight, without any kind of judicial activity or fine. I mean, this whole thing is kind of, I would say, a scandal.
Let's let him answer that.
Yeah, I can answer this. So the question was, if we know what companies make good products and what companies make really bad products, how do we find out those companies that make really bad products, right? So we don't use them. Well, the answer is the bad products never get certified. So for a water utility in Massachusetts or anywhere else in the US to purchase a product that's going to be in contact with drinking water, it has to be third-party certified to standard 61. So if it doesn't pass the test, you get the 61 certification, they can't sell it to a water utility in the U.S. Whereas the ones that are good and pass the test, they get certified. And the other thing, certification is more than just a test. It also involves unannounced inspections of the manufacturing facility to verify that they're still making the product the same way as the product originally tested, and then there's annual retesting.
And so, as long as they get this 61 standard, in any municipality, they should have at least that.
Right. And the other thing that I agreed that Andrew said was you can add other things to your bid specification. You can ask for a copy of the test report. You know, make the manufacturer give you a copy. You can ask for performance specifications. It hasn't undergone chlorine resistance testing, for example.
So for this to sound somewhat cynical, isn't there a little bit of a moving target though? Because I'm thinking about other industries, like what happened with VW emissions, where it's a bit of a moving target, right? You can submit for testing and then be jerry-rigging behind the scenes. I mean, no one's going to be on site.
So that's why
you're testing the material in real time.
So what you can
and so it's going to be a combination of, you know, believing that you're getting what you bought, which, you know, I'm sorry, at this point in my life, I don't, you know, on a regular basis. And then two, also there being good oversight from the city to make sure that, you know, standards are being met, things are being simple, that there's accountability, which with all due respect, we have not had a lot of around here with some of the other projects. So I'm just saying, you know, if you're asking us to sort of have a lot of faith.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, it starts local. If you want to understand what's happening in your community and the products that are going in, it starts by meetings like this. It starts by the support of the water company, the water board for doing this, for getting this here, because you're talking about it. You can put bid specifications in there that require certain performance criteria. Contractors will fight you like there's no tomorrow, because that means that it's going to either cost them more money or there's a potential that they may not pass, and they're going to lose business. And so you want to have those discussions. I agree with you. You want to do the testing of the products that are installed, right? So sending your product to NSF International, I know that there are organizations that can game systems and send good products over here, and then when I'm out at the job site, I see them doing something else. And what are you doing? Oh, well, we had to improvise, right? Well, that improvisation, I don't know if it got transferred to NSF 61. But what you need to do is do local kind of accountability associated with the contractors and the installers. And it's probably going to cost more money, but you know, it's understanding what you're installing and the long-term chemical leaching implications for your community. That's all I say.
Great, thank you, and thank you very much. Next up, I'd like to read you Joan Ruderman's bio. Joan Ruderman is a senior biologist and lecturer at the Princeton Environmental Institute. She previously served as the Marion E. Nelson Professor of Cell Biology at Harvard Medical School in Boston, and as the President and Director of the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole. Trained as a developmental biologist, most of her research has focused on the molecular mechanisms that regulate cell division and early development. More recently, she has worked on environmental contaminants that mimic estrogen and can increase the risk of breast cancer and other hormone-dependent cancers. As Senior Science Advisor at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard, she helped to establish a program that covers the cross-cutting roles of water in areas that range from human health to geopolitical disputes. Among her national leadership roles, she has served on the Medical Advisory Board of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and the Scientific Advisory Board of the Ellison Medical Foundation. Following her arrival at Princeton, she created a new undergraduate seminar course, quote, Hormonally Active Pollutants, end quote. Ruderman is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the U.S. National Academy of Sciences.
Thank you very much for this invitation. all very much for your interest here. So I'm going to turn now from the very big picture to water infrastructure to the other big picture of human health. In particular, focus on BPA as one of the components that we've heard about being considered by Cambridge, and what we know and what we don't know about this topic here. So the overview, and I realize this is very small letters for this, this room here, but first of all, we know that many chemicals that were designed for one purpose were then later discovered to have the absolutely, completely unexpected ability to mimic estrogen or interfere with testosterone, or in some cases, to do both of those, kind of a double whammy. These chemicals are often are officially called endocrine disruptors. I actually called my course hormonally active pollutants because I thought I called it endocrine disruptors, none of the students would come. So we now know that there are many, many animal experiments that show that fetal or very early life exposure, neonatal exposure to some endocrine disruptors have adverse effects. They can interfere with the normal formation of the male and the female reproductive organs. They can affect the timing of puberty, which is something that is of interest in our society, as the age of puberty is getting earlier and earlier in many developed societies. Some of these can reduce fertility. So this is an early fetal exposure having a later life effect. Some of them can affect certain behaviors, and some others can increase the risks of some kinds of hormone-dependent cancers like breast cancer or prostate cancer. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So as we've heard, many epoxy resins, most of which are made from BPA bisphenol A, which has been in the news a lot, are used in just an enormous variety of wonderful consumer applications, industrial applications. My glasses, which allow me to see you here, both parts are made of bisphenol A here. That's why they don't shatter. Unfortunately, the problem is that BPA leaches out of many of these resins, and when it does so, if it's in the wrong time, at the wrong place, it can interfere with your hormonal system, most typically by mimicking estrogen. And many, many animal experiments show that BPA can act as an endocrine disruptor. It's really the poster child of endocrine disruption. And so that's animal experiments. What about us? It's much harder to understand the effects of BPA exposure on humans. We're only starting to understand potential effects on human development, on fertility, cancer, and behavior. And I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. So, we're going to take a step back and talk about DDT first, because this was the first, as many of you probably know, this was the first chemical to be recognized as an environmental endocrine disruptor, and it has many, many parallels to the story of BPA, which we're considering today. So developed in the 40s during World War II, DDT actually helped the Allies win the Second World War because it combated malaria in tropical areas and combated lice which carried typhus. It was accepted post-war as just a wonderful chemical and put to use in all sorts of applications, agricultural, domestic. It was used to impregnate wallpaper that was hung in children's nurseries because it was thought that the fewer insects and pests around us, the better. So many of us remember the spray trucks that went through the neighborhoods. We were all exposed in some way to DDT, at least those of us in my generation, and I think which would include most of you in this room. A few not so much. So soon, however, after rampant spraying of DDT, began to see a wide variety of effects on wildlife, and especially in birds. It interfered with the formation of the eggshell, which is laid down by the oviduct, which is an estrogen-regulated organ in the birds. So when the mother bird or the father came to nest on the egg would crumple. By the late 1970s, it was actually known that DDT and some of its more persistent environmental breakdown products could, in addition to being an insecticide, could also bind and activate estrogen receptors in many species, including us, humans. And this was, sorry, I'm using different pair of systems here. My brain is not engaged yet. And this ability of DDT to act like an estrogen was just an enormous surprise because we know how it kills bugs. It acts as a neurotoxin. It binds and inhibits sodium channels in your nerve cells. And I've lost a structured DDT, but we'll see it on estrogen on the next slide. The structured DDT is so very different from estrogen. How could it bind the estrogen receptor and turn it on and make it do what estrogen normally does? Oh, raise your hand if you need me to speak louder. So there were two prospective, long-running epidemiological studies of humans that suggested that early developmental exposure to DDT is associated with an increased risk in breast cancer in women much later in life. So this is an amazing study, 54-year-old follow-up study of 20,000 pregnant women and their resulting daughters. So DDT was measured either in the serum of the mothers during pregnancy or in their cord blood right during delivery. And then it was found out 54 years later that pregnant mothers who had the highest concentrations of DDT in their blood, their daughters had about a 4-fold increased risk of developing breast cancer. Similarly, these studies found that girls who were exposed before the age of 14 had an increased risk of breast cancer, and the risk was greatest when they were exposed at age 4 or earlier. So why is this? Why is that exposure to a neurotoxin, which at lower non-toxic levels can mimic estrogen, why does this lead to breast cancer? You know, I think I'm going to ask you to do my question here. What do I do? You get this arrow here on the next slide. That'll free me up there. Okay. So, BPA, it's an old chemical. It was first created in Germany in the early 1890s. In the 1930s, despite its chemical structure here, right here, BPA, 2 rings and a linker here. Next to estrogen, you can see that it's quite different from estrogen, but BPA was discovered to have the ability to also mimic some of the effects of estrogen. But it was a very weak estrogen mimic, so it was never put into clinical use, and instead it sat on the shelf for about 25 years. And then in the 1950s, chemists at GE and Bayer found that you could mix bisphenol A, a weak synthetic estrogen, with phosgene. Who knows what phosgene is? Nerve gas used in the world trench warfare during World War II. Okay, so a weak synthetic estrogen mixed with nerve gas would create polycarbonate if left overnight. So there's wonderful properties: clear, shatterproof, heat resistant, moldable, all sorts of wonderful uses. And beyond polycarbonate, it's a component of many other epoxies used in a wide variety of commercial and consumer products. It's used to, if you go home tonight and open a can of tomatoes, you'll see that the liner of the can is either shiny gray or silvery. That's a BPA-containing resin. It's used to line your Starbucks coffee cup, your Chinese takeout container, the cardboard. The reason that those are leak-proof is that it prevents the cardboard from absorbing the liquid in it. It's used for resins on cash register receipts. It crosses the skin. Cashiers who are exposed to a lot of receipts during the day have higher blood levels of BPA than the rest of us. And as we've seen today, it's a component of resins that are used to make pipe liners for various regions. So in particular, epoxy-based cured in place. So let's have the next slide. Just to quickly give you a sense of what BPA is capable of doing in lab experiments, and these are typically with rats or mice, rodents. It's known that many different studies have found that prenatal exposure, this is the key thing, early life exposure, when individuals are most sensitive to chemicals, prenatal exposure to BPA can result in earlier onset of puberty in rodents. Now, it turns out that's not the case in humans. Decreased quality of eggs and sperm, reduced fertility, changes in the structure of the developing mammary gland, which gives rise to tissue organizations that promote improper precancerous growth in later life. Not to leave the guys out, early developmental exposure to BPA has been linked in animal studies with an increase in precancerous structures in the prostate gland, and there are many, many animal studies that show that early life exposure to low, environmentally relevant levels of BPA, similar to what we are exposed to, result in behavioral changes in rodents. So anxiety, increase in anxiety, changes in social behavior that, as established by well investigated assays for these in the laboratory. And a lot of this work I want to point out, was initiated by the lab of Anno Soto and her colleagues at Tufts Medical School. So I did it too? Nope, that's about it. Let's see. Let's go back and see what we've got. What is there? Okay. So just for example, early prenatal exposure to very low levels of BPA, and 2,000-fold less than the current EPA-mandated so-called safe dose of human safe dose of BPA, gives changes in the structure of the ducts, which are shown here as these little branching dark red things. On the unexposed animals, on the left, mammary gland shows the normal branching pattern, and on the right, in the adults who had received early prenatal BPA exposure, you can see that there's a change in the ductal structures, there's a lot more branching, the endpoints are shorter here. Next slide. So, yes? Yes, I have a competition back there, okay. So, in rodents, we see that fetal exposure to BPA induces changes in the mammary gland structure that only become evident in later life. Some people say, well, that's just mice, that's just rats, what about humans? Of course, you can't do these experiments with humans intentionally anyway, but what can be done is study higher primates, like this was done in the rhesus monkey, and we see that in monkeys who are prenatally exposed to the same levels of BPA that we are carrying around in our blood today, if you bump up that much BPA in their diet, which is the main way that we are exposed to BPA leaching from the food liners in cans, that on the left, there's the normal gland structure of the monkey mammary gland. On the right, you can see that having had higher exposure to BPA early in life results in a changed architecture of the mammary gland. Next slide. So again, I don't want to belabor this too much, but another study where rats were given half the current safe dose of BPA, we see that various structures look one way in control animals, and there are a series of precancerous tissue structures in the BPA-treated animals. Next slide. And looking at these more carefully under the microscope, we see evidence of things that you don't like to get on your breast biopsy. I can tell you that. Ductal hypoplasia, atypical ductal hypoplasia, atypical, and carcinoma in situ. These are things that are either beginnings of breast cancer or are well on their way to becoming a tumor. Next, please. So in males, again, early fetal exposure to BPA shows that sustained exposure to either BPA or estrogen induces abnormal cell growth in the prostate gland. If you're an adult and you're exposed to higher levels of BPA and you're a guy, you're more at risk for testosterone-induced prostate growth, actually if you're a guy rat. Prenatal exposure to BPA stimulates significant increases in abnormal prostate growth in the adult, and animals that are receiving as adults BPA above normal levels also see abnormal prostate cell growth. So there are hormone-dependent cancers in both sexes that can be enhanced or triggered by early fetal exposure to BPA, or in some cases by later adult exposure to BPA. So now, what about us? You should know that the placenta is no barrier to many chemicals, and BPA is no exception. It crosses the placenta, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. It's found in amniotic fluid, and it is found in human breast milk. So what do we know about BPA exposure in humans? Typically, you have to do prospective epidemiological studies. That is, you would take a cohort of pregnant mothers and you would measure their BPA exposure, either in their serum or by a metabolite that's excreted in the urine, and then you would follow their babies and examine them for, say, age of onset of puberty or behavior or reproductive tract abnormalities, which would normally become only evident much later in life. And I would say so far, so these are very young studies. The oldest group of kids that have been followed now are 9 or 10 years of age. So they're only just starting to go through puberty, a subset of them. I would say so far there's no evidence that BPA exposure, higher levels of BPA exposure are linked to earlier onset puberty. But so one would like to see that either validated or not in expanded epidemiological studies. The finding which seems to come out most prominently in these studies is that children born to mothers with the highest levels of BPA exposure have subsets that have abnormal social behavior, sort of externalizing behavior, aggressive behavior, attention deficit disorders, difficulties in expressing themselves. What about fertility? The results on this are mixed. Some studies, many of which were done here at Mass General Hospital, suggest that women with higher levels of BPA have slightly lower rates of fertility, either implantation or delivery, maybe a slightly higher incidence of premature birth, but other studies really don't find the same thing. So that may be good news. It may be that we need more studies. It may be that the effects are mixed in different types of investigational settings. What about breast cancer in humans? It's way too early to say. Remember the DDT studies? It took 50 years before the women who were born to mothers who had higher DDT levels were found to have higher incidence of breast cancer. So we're only starting to, 9 years in, starting to measure, to follow children born to mothers with high versus low BPA levels. But we do know if you take isolated human breast cells and you grow them in a petri dish in the laboratory, that BPA is just as good as estrogen in stimulating those breast cells to divide. BPA can turn on genes associated with very aggressive breast cancers, and in one study, BPA was found to reduce the effectiveness of 2 common chemotherapy agents that are used in the clinic there. So, what about BPA-free? Consumers, especially parents who read about BPA studies in parents' magazines, were concerned about the effects of BPA, and so demanded a replacement product. We now have many BPA-free products on the market. We have these nice water bottles from Nalgene. They're BPA-free water bottle, baby bottles that get in any department store. BPA-free epoxy resins in cans. The problem is that we now have several of these, BPF, BPS, and AF, and it turns out that each of these BPA substitutes are just as estrogenic as the others by a wide variety of assays. So the BPA-free containers are leaching as much estrogenic material as the original BPA-containing polycarbonate and other resins. So to summarize, what we know and what we don't know, in animals, it's very clear, animal experiments, it's very clear that fetuses and newborns are most susceptible to effects of low doses of BPA, including what we call environmentally relevant doses of BPA that humans are exposed to on an everyday basis. Animal experiments, including those with non-human primates like monkey, show that fetal and neonatal exposures to BPA at near safe levels can have adverse effects on the development of the mammary gland and on other reproductive tissues. In humans, as we talked about, the epidemiological studies are just starting, and it's going to be a long time before we have enough data to know whether the animal studies are predictive. And in the last slide, I'd like to, next to last, relate my concerns, in some cases serious concerns, about using a BPA-containing epoxy resin for any kind of water installation. So I point out that with the exception of drugs and food additives, there is actually no U.S. requirement for testing chemicals before they go into manufacturing. Before they go into our consumer products. There are, as we've heard, there are industrial groups which have mandated their own standards, and we can talk a little bit about that more. Second point is a major component of BPA is known to leach from Kirkland's pipes. The measured concentrations vary widely according to the studies that I've seen. In some other BPA-containing materials like polycarbonate, BPA leaches out from the material, and the older the material is, the more the BPA leaches out of it. And finally, I'd like to note that some companies in Europe, such as Sweden and Germany, have restricted or seriously discouraged the use of any epoxy-based materials for drinking water pipes. And then I'd like to end with the last slide, which I want to tell you that we have several nearby experts on the health effects of BPA, either in animal experiments or human. Anna Soda's lab and her colleagues at Tufts Medical School, Beverly Rubin, studies BPA on neural development and behavior. And I didn't tell you, but BPA is also what's called an obesogen, early fetal exposure to certain chemicals like BPA cause the animals to gain weight on a regular diet as adults compared to the controls. Russ Hauser School of Public Health has worked on BPA effects on human fertility. Laura Vandenberg at UMass, BPA and birth defects. And finally, Joseph Barnett Brown. I realize that's in Rhode Island, but I consider that a Boston area institution. He works on BPA exposure in human health, and all of these people routinely talk about their work in public. And then I think we have someone from the Silent Spring Institute in Newton who has an organization that has really focused a lot on epidemiological aspects of this, on identifying and bringing news of these types of discoveries to the public. So I think I've gone over a little bit, so I'll stop here and take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions?
Yeah. Hi, Craig Kelly. As years
tells us anything, except that if you go back, there's a lot of examples of problematic stuff that we didn't know at the time when we started using it. And at the risk of bringing politics into it, I just have less faith in the EPA now and for the next 4 years to give us guidance than I had in the past. So I'm sort of stuck with, you know, you told us all very interesting stuff that I think we already knew, which is nothing is certain. So, you know, now what? I think it comes down to the cost factor. Wait, just one second. So I think it comes down really to the cost, which was alluded to before. So do we have numbers out there about the difference in cost of what we're looking at in terms of pipe work?
The cost is significant. I would defer to some of the, I noticed there's a few industry representatives in the room. Do any of you want to take a crack at how much you would save? It's around, you'd save around 50%, I think. Maybe a little less, more. Yes?
I just wanted to say as a resident, I mean, I've heard other studies before, and I really appreciate you presenting. Personally, I feel like there's very strong evidence that these chemicals have an effect. I feel that as a resident, that I prefer to exercise the precautionary principle that before we, you know, put in this enormous infrastructure, that we make sure that it's safe, and if we're not sure, if there's some doubt, personally, I don't mind spending money on better quality pipes that are going to be usable in 100 years from now, and I can feel confident when I go to drink some water. Maybe I use a filter on my end, but I don't have to feel afraid that we're creating a generation of people that are becoming infertile and sick. So, you know, half the money, I just really think the issue here is what is the best liner for our water, what the best pipes are, and we'll just go from there. And that's how I feel about it.
So we have a very strong viewpoint towards the value of the precautionary principle, especially when you're dealing with at least one chemical for which there's a substantial body of evidence.
And that chemical, I mean, if you can look at the plastics industry for baby bottles, I actually went to Joan's lectures on water at Harvard, and then she threw up onto a board the chemical formula for the replacement chemical that everybody said was safe, and it was almost the same as the one that wasn't safe. So this is, anyway, yes.
And when you're talking about the costs, are you doing that over the whole life cycle with this?
No.
Because that, I think, is the key you have to do. Just like nuclear power over the life cycle is much more than price. Okay. So if you do it over, I hope you guys do that. What would it cost over 100 years and then divide it versus what is the plastic pipe? Because, and that's what my colleague here.
Go ahead.
The industry.
Would you want to stand up and describe where you're from?
I'm Sean Lanick from U.S. Pipe, a manufacturer. There's U.S. Pipe, a manufacturer of pipe. There's many factors that go into what the savings would be from using cure in place versus open cut versus trenchless technology. And you have, first and foremost, the first cost, but then you have also how you install it, the logistics, maintenance and protection of traffic, what size. Smaller mains are going to be cheaper than larger mains, but to her point, the most important factor in the way we see the industry shifting is that people are looking at the life cycle cost. Because a pipe could be cost half as much, but if it only lasts a third as long, it's not as good in the long run.
Yep.
So, I'd be happy to come back and speak to you guys about how we calculate life cycle cost and some other corrosion protection technologies if you guys are interested.
That's about glass.
How is this decision going to be made? Did the Cambridge residents get the vote?
No.
So who makes this decision?
Well, we are members of the Cambridge Water Board, and a little known fact is that the Cambridge Water Board, unlike most other city commissions, actually is statutory. And so we predated the planning form of government. And we have statutory power over the water department. And so, in my opinion, and the city manager may take issue with this, but I don't think he probably will. In my opinion, we make the decision.
Thank you so much for having this forum, because I think it's been very informative. I think it endorses a lot of stuff that a lot of us probably already knew or suspected. But I think that, to me, I don't really see how there's really a question on the table, because there's a lot of unknowns. Our environmental protection in this country is minimal. I think to the speaker's point, we put chemicals out there and we just don't know what the impact is going to be on human health. We have astroturf all over our fields, and now there's all kinds of evidence to suggest that it increases cancer risk in kids. And I just don't see that there's really a question on the table. I think that if there is even a remote chance that putting epoxy lined pipes is a health hazard, we shouldn't be considering it.
So, despite the fact that the Cambridge Water Board has power over this, I encourage you all in an election year to talk to your city councilors. I've talked to many, and they are all extremely interested in this issue. And it is an election coming up in November. And, with all, I don't want to say anything that offends Councilor Kelly, but I have noticed. I have noticed that as the election gets closer, the city councilors get even more eager than they usually are to talk to you. So, so I recommend it. Yes.
I'm moved by the sort of general opinion. I think the one unknown to me is that we've had a little less than 2 hours of discussion of some of the ill effects of polymer-lined pipes. I feel that before we move in consensus toward the alternative, I'd like to see what are the health hazards of traditional metal pipes or in their current use, solder, etc.
And those are actually more well known, I believe. So we can, and that is actually what we have had in Cambridge. We have had ductile iron pipes, and according to the city engineer, the water department engineer who I talked to, the ones that they are considering replacing are 120 years old. So you could look at that two different ways. It means they've lasted for 120 years, and now they need to be replaced. So talk about life cycle costs, but those are, as they, you're right, Val, there should be a discussion of that also. Yes?
I would like to suggest that MIT and Harvard are both in Cambridge, and that there might be, because considering that this testing seems to be totally freakishly unsuccessful, that a PhD program could be initiated at both institutions in this area to look at testing, and then to look in a general way, in a scientifically respectable way, at the production, what other chemicals, what all these things that we don't know. There could maybe be a prize for the best work done by a student. Sometimes students, even undergraduates, can think of things when they're set to the task with fresh eyes. And I suggest that maybe Cambridge would give a prize to, or do something. I mean, this, I think, is our only independent source, because if you leave it to the U.S. government, you get the problems of political leakage. And if you leave it to an independent source, it will be somebody with a financial background. That's what need.
Right. Okay. Molly.
Yeah, I think more just don't know, but I guess my last question would be, when we talk about cost, we're not talking about the cost of the pipe. We're talking about the cost of the install and working. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so then there's 50% savings if you line them as opposed to taking them and putting something in it.
Yeah. Okay. And we're not talking about life cycle costs. And the man from the Pipe Association, we're talking about we're talking about larger mains. And what it would be in the larger mains, as I understand, is finished water coming directly out of the plant with this CIPP pipe and going up to Payson Park and back down into your houses. So we aren't talking about smaller pipes. If we were talking about smaller pipes, I would be concerned about more leaching, but we aren't. We're talking about a 40-inch or a 60-inch main.
Forgive my ignorance, this is my first waterborne meeting, but is this something, thank you for asking, is this something, I know our pipes are old, we need to replace them. Is this something that's coming up? Is this something that's happening? I live in a neighborhood that's been under construction for 5 years. I feel like we already
You're on Avenue. Are you there?
I'm on Alpine Street.
Oh, okay.
I feel like we already replaced our pipes.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong, but.
So, as I understand it, this is under the capital budget, and it's under consideration in the capital budget for outlays. You know, it might be 5 years, it might be less, but that's why it's so timely to look at this before. What I'm concerned about is that we don't do it prospectively, that we don't have a discussion around these issues. And then the main going up to Payson Park breaks. And they say, oh, we gotta do this right now, we gotta have a CIPP, let's do it, let's get it done. Let's take it and let's really, discuss. Yes.
Yeah, let's see 2 points. Just listening to all this, it seems, if you look at it from the point of view of not thinking about cost, but what is the best way to go, it seems like the infrastructure that we've had for 100+ years has been serviced pretty well, and there may be some downsides which we know about and know how to deal with. This other one is has many downsides and many unknowns, and it just doesn't seem to be a good option. And if you look at it from the point of view of cost, it also sounds like this new lining is actually not cheaper. I mean, if you just talk about a short-term installation versus you need to compare actual the same kinds of costs, it sounds like it's going to be more expensive. It doesn't actually sound like it's better on either front.
Thank you. Yes.
And this young man who is pipe mentioned to me that there actually are pipes that use glass liners that are installed after the pipes are in the ground. But currently they're only in sewer pipes, is that correct?
Well, not after it's installed. We manufacture.
Oh, they manufacture, but there's a glass liner. Which may deal with a lot of these issues.
Really? How about trucks going over it?
It's actually very flexible. You can take it and bend it. And,
really?
Yeah. But
has it ever been used for domestic water?
Not that I know of, and not that anyone with the guy who developed it knows of. It tends to be more expensive. It's used in sludge lines because it doesn't allow buildup to occur on the inside of the pipe, so you get better efficiency with your pumps. But it's expensive.
Yeah.
And UMass Lowell, quite a few years, has had a green chemistry department.
Say louder.
UMass Lowell has a green chemistry department. They've had one for quite some time. And I know there's somebody there who just patented a coating for pipes that's supposed to be more benign. I don't know if you know about that, than various BPAs and epoxies. So that might really be something to look into. It may be available before this has to be done.
Yes?
And I just happened to have a letter from the finance director about great news, no water rate increase for the 7th consecutive year. I think most of us are in the place where we rather have the safer option. But it's really difficult to understand how much that's going to cost if the numbers aren't out there. And you guys proposed a rate increase. So the discussion, I think, would be fuller if we could really delve down into how much money it's going to cost. Then we can have a more informed decision about whether we want next year's letter to say no rate increase or to say we're charging more money but you're going to get safer water.
Well, if I understand it correctly, the infrastructure costs don't come out of the enterprise fund. Is that right? Or not, Sam? Do the infrastructure costs for pipe, do they come out of the enterprise fund?
Yes.
They do? Yes. Okay. So
expenses of the water department on the water rate.
Okay. All right. So that's a very good point, and we really need to balance the. I mean, you wouldn't put something cheaper on your daughter's some kind of cheaper cereal in your daughter's bowl in the morning if it had a chance of having a problem with it that would make her sick. So that's the balance.
As a plumber, my vote is for the ductile iron.
Stand up, say that louder.
As a plumber, my vote is for the ductile iron.
Yes.
What did you say? She said as a plumber, her vote is for the ductile iron.
Thank you for this form. It's really helpful on this. Will this be available online for access and I know since
That is Cambridge Community Television, and they are taping it. It will be on at some point. I think, can you call and find out when?
Yeah, it should be on within probably a week. In about a week, it should be up.
Oh, great. And if you, I think we will be able to actually, at some point, will we be able to get a DVD or a download?
You will. Unfortunately, yeah, you will.
Okay. Pardon me? These will be made into handouts? Well, what I think will happen is the PowerPoints will be, as part of this, they will be PowerPoint. You'll be able to download them from the internet. Yes.
I just want to find out when will you make your recommendation on your decision?
I don't know. It might be a long process, but we want to. This is the very first step, and we want to, make sure that everything goes along and that we get enough information. Yes.
I just wanted to counterpoint on Craig one more time to say that I feel that the price of things are extremely relative, and you don't want to pay less upfront and have a greater cost in the long run if you're looking at the big picture. And I think that as far as our health, it's priceless. So I don't think that should be a major consideration in the choice. Great. Thank you.
Okay. One last question, if you have one. Yes.
How often do you meet? What are your meetings?
We meet, usually it's the second Tuesday of the month. It's not today. We meet upstairs in that conference room. And it's all open to the public.